Hello and welcome to this Accelerated ID series. My name is Shantae Skildigger and I am the Chief Trainologist and founder of the Instructional Design Company. I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you about this episode. So today we are going to be talking about career changers and how career changers who are teachers making the transition into instructional design can do that. So there are a lot of similarities between a teacher role and an instructional design role, but there are a lot of differences too. And it's those differences that we really need to zoom in on so that you know what your gaps are and what you need to be working on to develop yourself into an instructional designer. So, why choose instructional design if you are a teacher? Well, like I said at the very beginning, we have a lot of skills as teachers that immediately cross over into instructional design that are immediately relevant. And in case you don't know, I am also a former teacher. I taught fifth grade and I taught sixth grade social studies and science. So, what was really interesting to me as I made that transition was that I was really pleasantly surprised to find out how many skills I already had in my toolkit that were applicable to my new job, right? And so, we'll talk about that. But then we'll talk about those things that you really got to get developed in order to be a really strong instructional designer. So, paths to instructional design. There are many ways that you can work on yourself to become an instructional designer. You can be self-taught. So you could read blogs, you could read books, you could try developing some training or learning solutions on your own and learn through that trial and effort process. Totally a great option for those that are really disciplined, like that self-study, don't need as much hands-on work. So that's one path for you. Other people end up in an instructional design job by luck or by chance. Maybe they had a different role in the organization and somebody said, you know what, you're really good at working with people, or you're really good at explaining things. I think you would be a really good instructional designer, or you would be an asset to the L&D team. And they end up in that role. My experience as a hiring manager over the years is that most of the people on my team didn't have a background in instructional design. They didn't have a formal education. They didn't have a certificate. They just somehow landed on the L&D team. Maybe they were really good at delivering presentations and someone thought, wow, you would be a really great trainer. And then because they thought they were a really great trainer, that they would be a really good content writer, right? So there's all kinds of different paths into instructional design. Other paths includes taking a certificate program. There are many of them out there that are certified certification programs that you could plug into. And then another option are the degree programs. So you could get another bachelor's degree, or you could go and get a master's program. So there are many ways that you can make your way into instructional design from a teaching role. So I just wanted to put that out there into the space that you have options on how you get from where you are today to where you want to be in the future. Now, in addition to thinking about what path really works best for you, what path works best for your budget, your time commitment, you've also got to be thinking about what kind of instructional designer role best suits your interest, because there are different types. Now, I don't want it to sound like if you choose one type, you can't change your mind later, because that's not true. I've literally worked in all three of these roles that you see on the screen, and they all have different benefits. They have pros, they have cons. And let's talk about that for just a second so you kind of know what path that you might want to explore. And at the end of this, I'll drop a link in. There's another training that really digs into these three types that you could explore on your own later if you really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper to help you make that good, informed choice for yourself. So as a corporate instructional designer, you would be working in a business. You might be working on employee training or compliance training or leadership development or creating learning paths for succession planning and things like that. So you would be using tools like Captivate or Articulate, or maybe you are creating for a live learning solution delivery. So maybe you're using PowerPoint. You might create facilitator guides, participant workbooks, infographics, one-pagers, and things like that. Then in higher ed, higher ed is a little bit unique because all those things that I just described about corporate, there is an element of that in higher ed whenever you're thinking about training or creating learning solutions for the faculty and the staff of a university or a college. You would still be doing things like creating facilitator guides, participant workbooks, creating learning solutions and tools like Captivate or Articulate, or creating learning solutions for the live delivery experience, or even hybrid, right? If we're thinking about doing something via Zoom, a webinar. So in corporate, you do all those things. And then there's a segment of higher ed where you do those things. But higher ed has another branch that you might be interested in or pulled to or drawn to. And this is the side where the instructional designer helps create the courses or the learning experiences for the students who are going through the courses there at the university. So you might be paired with a faculty member or a subject matter expert to help create a course. And that course creation process is a lot different than it is in a corporate environment or even working with faculty and staff. You might be using tools like Canvas, which is a type of LMS, but it's a different type of LMS than what you would see in your typical corporate setting. You might be creating learning experiences in an online format that require discussion questions. You'll have different standards or student learning outcomes that you have to build around, which again is different than that corporate environment. And then as a freelancer, you might do a little bit of both. You might have one contract job where you are supporting a university and another contract job where you are supporting a small business or a corporation as an extension of their L&D team. So these are three types of instructional designer roles that are all possibilities for you. And again, as a teacher, you already have some skill sets that are immediately applicable to any of these roles, but you've got to choose which one interests you the most so that you know which tools you need to work on and which skill sets that you still need to develop a little bit further. Now, as a teacher, you have many areas of expertise that align with instructional design. So as an instructional designer, you are a learning experience expert. You're not always a subject matter expert. So I want to explain that because as instructional designers, we often get paired with subject matter experts on a particular topic to build a learning experience for a participant in one of our programs, right? So you wear the subject matter expert hat as an instructional designer in the area of learning experience design. So you are the SME for that learning experience design. But then somebody else typically has the subject matter expert hat for a topic, whether it's leadership development, it's ethics, it's sales, it is filling out your expense report or how to submit a credit card reimbursement, any of those things, right? So we are typically paired with people, but we aren't always the subject matter expert. Now, I don't want to sound like that is 100% the setup all the time, because I'll tell you, there have been roles that I have been in as an instructional designer where I was responsible for being the subject matter expert of the learning experience design, but I was also the topic subject matter expert, which meant that I had to go and research and learn as much as I could about that topic in order to write really good content around that topic. Now, teachers, on the other hand, they tend to be content subject matter experts, learning experience design experts, facilitation experts, classroom management experts, right? We wear a lot of hats as teacher. But that piece that I really want to bring over for you to be thinking about is that learning experience expertise, right? You know, as a teacher, how to structure curriculum so that it engages learners. You know how to deliver that so that you can engage learners. And I'll tell you that one of the benefits of being someone who knows how to write content and how to deliver content is that you can imagine in your mind as you are writing content or you're writing a lesson, you can imagine how that might play out in the room. And that's a really spectacular skill for an instructional designer to have. You've got vision of how your writing could come out in real life, right? So if I do this activity and I have these 4 groups, like you can just imagine how that works. Or you can imagine like how you ask a question and how you build in pauses or how you pull information back from a person that's going through the program. Like you have a little bit more expertise in that area because you have been delivering for so long. And that is just a really invaluable skill for you to have, right? Then one of the things that I wanted to talk about it. So here's where we're really getting into our differences, right? So back here, this was difference one was our different areas of expertise. Difference two is lesson planning versus an instructional system design model. So you're going to see the overlap between the two, but I'll also walk you through what these differences are because the way that these are laid out, while they are very similar in nature, they don't use the same language. So that's one piece that's different. And that was one of the things that I discovered whenever I made the transition from classroom management of adults and children. I was so shocked to figure out, like, wow, the same way I would manage a 10 or 11-year-old is pretty much the same that I would manage an adult, as far as bringing them in and hooking them and, trying to create that what's in it for me connection and delivering in bite-sized chunks so that I could keep their attention. So there were a lot of similarities. Of course, there were differences because they challenged me in different ways in the writing of the content. But I share that with you. So again, just to reinforce that you already have a really great foundation to scaffold from as we are filling in these gaps that we call differences. Okay. All right. So as a teacher, as you know, that you do a lot of lesson planning, right? We do lesson planning. We have to assess our students' needs. We need to plan using learning objectives or state standards. We have to prepare instructional materials. Maybe we're creating quizzes, or maybe we're creating worksheets, or maybe we're just creating small group discussions and interactions. We literally stand at the front of the room, back of the room, side of the room, middle of the room to deliver these lessons. And then we assign student work and we evaluate that work, right? Those are things that we do as a teacher. So now I'm going to shift over into this instructional system design model, which is like lesson planning, but different. It's a little bit more robust, but even in that different model, you're going to see some similarities. So let's look at those. All right, so ADDIE is one of the most popular instructional system design models out there. There are many. A lot of times people ask me, well, which is the model that I need to know? Well, I would tell you that you do need to know ADDIE. You should probably know SAM, and you should be familiar with a few others. For me, in Shantae's world, in Shantae's perspective, you don't have to know them all, but you have to know at least one or two really well. And then you need to pick whichever one that you like and stick to that model, because it's the consistent usage of that model that makes the model effective. All right, so ADDIE, again, being one of the most popular instructional system design models, this is where we get into differences between lesson planning and building out a course, a training solution, a learning solution. I use all those terms interchangeably. So as an instructional designer, we always start with analysis. So I'll be analyzing the project needs. I'll be analyzing my learners. What are their needs? What are their pain points? I'll be analyzing how this learning solution can help impact a business KPI or OKR. So I'll be doing all this analysis stuff. And I'll tell you that about 30% of the work that you do in this ADDIE model is in the analysis phase. You do a lot of Upwork analysis to really lay the foundation of what you're going to build out from that analysis part. Then we're going to do design. So we'll design the learning experience. We'll chunk the content into sections. We'll decide like how we're going to engage our learner. We'll script, we'll storyboard, we'll create that whole vision of what that learning experience is going to look like, what behaviors we're trying to change, what objectives we're trying to target. And then once we've done that, again, we've gone from analysis to design, and now we're going to develop. So now we're going to start building it, and we're going to build in whatever tool the organization wants us to build in. So as a corporate instructional designer, you might be building in Captivate. You might be using iSpring. You might be using Articulate Storyline 360, or you might be using Rise. There are so many different tools out there that you might be using. If you're in higher ed, you might be building in Canvas. Again, it's that LMS, but it's also where the e-learning happens. You might be building in a PowerPoint for a live learning solution. You might be building the facilitator guides, the assessment questions, the participant workbooks, any of the other assets that are needed. This is where you're compiling all those things together. Then we have implement. So implementation, if I'm talking in teacher speak, implementation is where you stand at the front of the room and you deliver that lesson. But in corporate, freelance, and higher ed, implementation looks different depending on what the requirements are that were given to you. There are requirements sometimes that say, okay, so implementation for this particular training is going to be you, Shantae, instructional designer. I want you to build a learning solution for a live setting for 50 people. And then when that's finished, you're going to hand that off to our facilitator. Our facilitator will go and deliver that content. So that's one type of implementation. Another type of implementation is where we build e-learning solutions or we build instructional videos. So again, as the instructional designer, I might be the one that builds that from start to finish. I might do just the instructional design part and then pass it off to an e-learning developer or a video specialist. And then when all of it's done, when somebody has signed off and said, yes, this is the learning experience that we were looking for, it gets uploaded into a learning management system, right? And there are many kinds of learning management systems out there. But that learning management system would be the implementation. So it's hosted online for online consumption, usually on demand whenever the learner wants to learn. They can plug in, they can watch part of the learning, they can take a break, come back 2 days later, come back, resume that training and go, right? So that's what we're talking about with implementation. How is it going to be delivered? Is it going to be delivered live? Is it going to be delivered as a video? Is it going to be delivered via our LMS system? So those are all questions that we would work with our subject matter experts, our stakeholders to answer in that analysis phase at the very beginning. And then rounding out this instructional system design model is evaluate. So evaluate is where we evaluate the surveys that courses have. We evaluate the learner's performance on assessment questions, knowledge checks, quizzes. We evaluate the feedback that we get from facilitators who are delivering in-room training sessions. We take all of that in to determine if we need to tweak or improve that learning experience. So you're probably hearing some overlap between what you do as a teacher, but also recognizing some differences, right? All right, so these are just some of the high-level things that you do within that instructional system design model, Addie. We do that needs analysis, we curate content, we work with subject matter experts, we work with stakeholders, we write learning objectives, we write program objectives, we outline, we script, we storyboard, we organize content so that it has a nice flow so it's not disruptive to the learning experience. We pare that content down where it really focuses on the need to know content and eliminates the distractions of nice to know content. We chunk it into small bites so that our learners can take it in, process it, really stick it to their memory before we build on that. We implement it. We look at what strategies we can implement to improve learner retention, right? It's not just a one and done, you dump content and you go. There are also some strategies around how you present information and follow up on information to help that learning really stick. We do surveys, we write surveys, we evaluate those surveys, we crunch the numbers on the data so that we can get some metrics that we then report up to senior management. And of course, all through this process, we are asking for feedback. We are receiving feedback. We are grateful for feedback. And then we turn around and we implement the feedback that we think is appropriate. So one thing to really call out here that is very different from teaching is that as a teacher inside your classroom, you're kind of like your own boss in that classroom. You're calling the shots about the lessons. You're calling the shots about what you're going to say when, like it's your domain. But as an instructional designer, we're a lot more collaborative. We're working with subject matter experts. We're answering to our stakeholders, whoever they are. It could be the leadership team. It could be your boss. It could be a colleague. It could be a department head from another department, right? We have many different stakeholders. So we move from all that autonomy as a teacher into having to work with others more collaboratively and getting feedback on our work. So if you're not used to getting feedback on your work, this is a muscle that you definitely want to flex early and get used to it, because there is no way to do instructional design without getting feedback and hearing that feedback and discerning which feedback is good and which feedback is helpful from that that's not. All right. Project management. As a teacher, you are a project manager. As an instructional designer, you are a project manager. I think pretty much every role that we have in life has a project management component. As a teacher, you were responsible for project management in the sense of you have created your lesson plan. You knew what you were going to do this 15 minutes, this 30-minute block. You know what you were going to do after lunch. You planned for those days right before we leave for Christmas break, right? Where the kids get really high energy, really excited about being out for 2 weeks, or when they come back from spring break, or that last home stretch before summer. We had to be really strategic in how we manage the dynamics and the energy of the classroom and still move learning along. So lesson planning was one way that we did that. How we controlled the delivery of content is another way that we did that. How we did our grading, right? In some districts, it's a 6 weeks grading cycle. In others, it's 9 weeks. But we had to plan those 6 weeks and those 9 weeks with content in a way that by the end of the school year, we had hit all those state standards that we were responsible for. Or if you have standardized testing, right? We have to make sure that we got the kids ready for those standardized tests. We knew which date they were going to be on, but we had a project plan up to that point. Well, it's very similar in instructional design, but now you're planning the whole process of a course build. You're planning meetings with stakeholders. You're planning the evaluation. You're planning the implementation. You're working in dependencies. Dependencies are things that have to be done before some other work can be done, right? So you have to take that whole big picture and really develop your project management skills in a whole different way. As a teacher, it was just stuff that we knew that we had to do. But as an instructional designer, you've got to have a real methodology behind you and a real system to manage all of these different pieces, because you might be working on 3, 4, or 5 different instructional design projects. So you need some sort of tool and a methodology to help you manage that process. And then difference 4, we have education methods. In our public school sector, you hear pedagogy a lot. As you transition into instructional design, you're going to hear andragogy, right? So with pedagogy, this is really dependent on the teacher. So the teacher is driving the learning experience. On the other side, andragogy, when we're talking about adult learning, you're really involving the learner in that process. Adult learners want to have a stake in their learning. They want to know it's relevant. They want to have a voice in it. They want to chime in with their input. They want to problem solve. They want to be a key player in that process versus being passive and told what they need to learn. So that changes for us. So as people that are transitioning from teaching to instructional design, we've got to look at how can we create learning experiences that involve the learner and move the teacher in us out of the way a little bit, where it's not just constant information or content dumping, but there's interactions that we build in so that the learner is interacting with the content, reflecting on it, thinking about how it relates to their job or to their personal life, or how it can help them advance as a leader in the company. And then difference 5 is our lesson delivery, right? We've kind of already covered this in some of the others, but we'll just talk about it here. So whenever we talked about implementation, I kind of already explained this. But with lesson delivery, again, as a teacher, you stand at the front of the room, you deliver the lesson, maybe you take them to the computer lab or have some computer stations and they consume some lessons that way, or maybe they do a little bit of self-study by reading and doing some worksheets. Well, it's different for us as instructional designers. We don't do lesson delivery, right? We create learning experiences. So we create for that live learning experience. We create for that on-demand learning experience that's in the LMS, or sometimes instructional videos that get sent out via email or a company newsletter or something like that. So we really shift from being the person at the front of the room that has to do classroom management, deliver the content, check that people learn, to this different modality of delivering content. But again, it's never us, or it's typically not us. There are instructional design jobs where an instructional designer is the instructional designer, the e-learning developer, and the training facilitator, and the LMS administrator. So in your smaller organizations, you might experience that kind of role. But typically, we create materials that someone else either delivers or that is hosted on a learning management system. And then difference number 6. So our teacher tools are different from our instructional designer tools. So as a teacher, you'll have ed tech tools. You'll use slides. You'll use an online grading book. You will use Google Classroom. You may even use Canvas. And then your classroom setup, you'll have tables, desks. You'll have your bookshelf with all of your books. You'll have your support resources. The students may have textbooks, or maybe they have electronic textbooks, depending on where you are and what grade level you are teaching. And then as an instructional designer, we're looking like, okay, I need presentation tools like PowerPoint, Google Slide. I might need Canva to help me like snazz up some of my images. I need to know some of this e-learning software like Articulate Storyline 360, Articulate's Rise, Captivate, iSpring, and then of course video software for those instructional videos. And that's typically either Adobe Premiere Pro or Camtasia, or another tool might be ScreenFlow, so different things like that. So as you can see, again, we have a lot of similarities between instructional design and teaching, but then there are things that are different. So if instructional design is your next career, now you know what some of those differences are so that you know where you can start working, right? Start developing those skills. And again, you can either be self-taught, you can participate in a certificate program, you could go back to school. Maybe you luck out and you end up on a training team. Maybe you start taking on some training opportunities within your district. You volunteer to create some training opportunities so that you could develop that experience and put that on your resume, right? So these are the things that I wanted to talk to you about today. I really enjoyed sharing this topic with you.